We welcome you to episode number 20 of Instant Reaction. We will be previewing St. John's and DePaul, the first ever Big East opener that is in the first month, or rather the first week of December. Oddly enough, it is against the DePaul Blue Demons, and there is a lot at stake here for St. John's tomorrow. Alongside my guys Mike Szabo, Dan Stack, Joey Jarzynka, with you, we will be welcoming senior writer for wearedepaul.com, our good friend of the program and of the website, Dan Stack. Dan, good to see you, sir. How are things on your side?
Very good. I'm glad to be here again. It's interesting. That's the first Big East game of the year, and they pit some theatrics with David Jones playing against his old team. So it's going to be a high intensity, high theatric kind of game.
Really crazy stuff to see what's when this game came out, or when the entire schedule came out, and this one was highlighted as the Big East opener because, again, tomorrow's December 7th, kind of taking a page out of the Big Ten's playbook, trying to go a few weeks earlier, and then potentially, this is kind of like a beta test, if you will, Mike. And very odd to see, to see DePaul St. John's on the Wednesday on December 7th, as opposed to, like right after the holidays or anything along those lines. And very odd to see St. John's and DePaul. I mean, especially since we got to see DePaul Creighton last year on Christmas. I guess DePaul is just that, that team that gets to be a part of all the beta testing, huh, Mike?
Yeah, it seems sort of strange. I guess it's just a kind of strange circumstance for DePaul to be in, and I think it's in general an intriguing matchup to start not only both teams' conference slates but the entire Big East slate.
Oh yeah, and I could tell you this too, Dan. We've gotten a chance to talk a lot about St. John's, but not a lot about DePaul. And you and I, we were together, as was Mike too, at Big East Media Day back in October, almost 2 months ago. And this is a DePaul team that has very high expectations, especially out in Chicago. Not so much here on this side because St. John's has kind of taken the bull by the horn in terms of expectations. Now they're 8-1 and DePaul's 5-3, but a lot of those wins though that they've got, their last two, especially the Loyola Chicago one, an absolute gritty battle. They erased a 17-point deficit to come back and win 78-72 over in their building. What a job that everyone put together. Javon Johnson, nonetheless, 27 points, second in scoring in the Big East, 18.4 points per game. What a job that DePaul has done, especially in their most recent battle.
Yeah, that was a great comeback. We pretty much have a dynamic duo and a bunch of supporting actors. Javon Johnson, like you said, had a great game. He was perfect in overtime. He was perfect. He was Big East Player of the Week. Actually, got the Lute Olson National Player of the Week. Actually, after he averaged 27.5 for the two games in the week. And we also have to give out props to Umoja Gibson, who had a fantastic stretch down the in the Loyola game, made some big 3-pointers in overtime, and he himself had like 23 points, and I think they combined for 50. Yeah, I think they combined for 50 total in that game, and they're showing a lot of grit because they have to. I mean, we're besieged by injuries. We're down our two centers, and we're down our starting point guard that was supposed to be playing, and I don't know if you know this, but there's a chance that he might play tomorrow at Caleb Murphy. Yeah, he's going to give it a go. It's a game time decision for him. The transfer from South Florida was supposed to be a very good driver, penetrator, assist guy, high energy on defense. Not a good shooter, but he might get some minutes tomorrow. So, but otherwise, we're looking at a game where our weaknesses are some of the biggest strengths for St. John's, and that's rebounding the ball with Soriano. So we got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, and you brought up about Joel Soriano too, because especially one of the big time players that DePaul has on their roster, Nick Ongenda, slated to miss another 8 to 10 weeks. That was announced back 5 days ago on December 1st. He got hurt in the preseason wrist surgery, so another 8 to 10 weeks in addition to the 4 that he was slated to miss. So that is so crucial, especially down low too, Dan, because now, and I'll get to Mike in a second on this because this is something that DePaul, they kind of look like a much smaller team, kind of the way St. John's was built back in the Chris Mullin days, where the tallest guy is like 6'8", and you look at Errol Penn, obviously, who is from this area anyway, so he's making his homecoming here in the Big East. The grad transfer from LIU in the NEC, of course. And he'll be kind of the 5. And how tough is that going to be? Almost like a mismatch between him and Joel Soriano, a man who Soriano, that is, averaging a double-double, 14 points per game and 12 boards, and he's about 4 boards ahead of the next possible player in that category.
Yeah, and like I said, this Nick Jenna's out, and our backup center who plays a lot, Yorane, is out.
Yeah,
he's got a sore foot. I don't know, a lower ankle issue. He might be another couple weeks. So yeah, we got Errol Penn, like you said, he's pretty much our de facto center now, and we got a junior college power forward that plays some center too, Deshaun Nelson. He's a high energy guy. They're both, Penn and Nelson are high energy players that play with a lot of heart. They play above their height, but usually it's not good enough because the last couple of games they've been getting out rebounded big time, especially against Loyola. I think it was a 16-point margin on the boards. They lost by, I think, even more, maybe 18-20 against Texas A&M in their last loss. So, I think that's what their game plan is for Soriano. My guess is that they're going to double team Soriano at every chance they get and dare St. John's to beat her from the outside and try to pressure the guards, make them possessions longer, and just double team Soriano when they get the chance, because they don't really have the height. They're just going to throw a couple of things on the wall and see what happens.
Well, a couple of those things that they can throw on the wall, and now I'm going to throw this over to Mike Szabo, because him and we've gotten a chance to talk about this all the time, Mike, and we've spoken about the three-point defense that St. John's struggles with, and granted, they do struggle. Statistically, they are 5th in that category in three-point defense. Middle of the pack, 5th out of 11 total teams, obviously. They've given up 69 three-pointers in 219 total opportunities, which is a 31% clip. But they do have, obviously, DePaul, that is, some three-point shooters, and one of which is Emoja Gibson. 4th in scoring in the Big East. You look at what they've done from distance the last couple of games. Him and Javon Johnson, a combined 7 of 13 from distance. This team could potentially beat you from deep, and this is something that is a weak point for St. John's. I mean, it's really tough to pinpoint other things that are weaknesses for St. John's, but this one is clear cut and possibly one of the ways that DePaul could beat the Johnnies tomorrow.
Yeah, out of many issues that you could pinpoint on St. John's so far early on in the year, one of the major points everybody's been getting on is the three-point defense, and it's absolutely true. The three-point defense for long stretches in a lot of these games has been pretty poor. They've been late on assignments, slow on rotations, and whatnot, and you're going to come into the conference, which has some conference play that has some pretty good shooters, and like you said, DePaul's got a couple solid ones coming into tomorrow night's game. So it's going to be interesting how they adjust St. John's to all of that. And, this is 2 teams really coming into this individual game itself, in 2 different spaces. Obviously, DePaul with the nice win that you hope could build momentum, a real lots of positives from that game. And then on the opposite side, and St. John's that probably had just about as rock bottom of a loss you could have, even though it was only by 11 points to Iowa State, and needing, a huge bounce back quick.
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch for, especially when we've spoken about this for so many years. And I know Dan and I have spoken about this in the Seton Hall media room at the Prudential Center for so many years that him and I have known each other about, the scheduling. And I love now that we are beginning to see head coach Tony Stubblefield and their entire crew scheduling these big battles. And, they're scheduling well, too. And I know that it's a thorn in the side of every St. John's fan and every single soul that covers St. John's, like Mike and myself, where we always say to ourselves every single year, the schedule is terrible. But I love the way DePaul schedules their non-conference. You look, they've won back-to-back games, one against Samford and the other against Loyola Chicago. Dan, this is a team that, I mean, again, just by looking at it, and please tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I think DePaul is in better position than St. John's in terms of, again, their schedule and who is ready to go And I'm going to put injuries aside here. They're, I guess, more prepared for conference play than a St. John's would. Is that fair to say, or what would your assessment be of that?
Yeah, it's fair. It's weird because the net rankings and the strength of schedule definitely are favoring DePaul. I think the thing is, what helps that is the sub 250 ranking teams in the net rankings or RPI. That's a big thing. They're staying away from that. Maybe St. John's plays a lot of those, but I've noticed that St. John's played some decent programs like Syracuse and Temple, and Nebraska. Not good. Some of those are not really good teams, but they're at least in good conferences. DePaul is a big Power 5 win over Minnesota on the road, and they played obviously Loyola. They're not going to be that good this year, but they're running on the coattails of some of the success they had the last couple of years, and they're also playing. They played Oklahoma State, Santa Clara, and Bahamas, which are pretty good programs, and Texas A&M after Thanksgiving they played them, and they still play Northwestern starting to play really well too. They beat Michigan State the other day, and so I think they're very good because they got a lot of the teams in the 50 to 150 rankings they're playing. So those are helpful, that strength of schedule. And
and
if it wasn't for the injuries,
and that's the big. Yeah, Dan, go ahead.
No, I was just saying if it wasn't for the injuries, we'd be really excited about our chances. But we'll see. Winning tomorrow would be a really important, pivotal moment for them if they get that one.
Mike, I think something too that again you and I have discussed ad nauseum is about the schedule, and I know our good friend Ian Schreier always loves to talk about St. John's schedule because how lackluster it has been. But again, some of the teams that Dan has brought up, the Loyola Chicagos of the world, Texas A&M, they also lost, I believe, by 5, 82 to, or rather 4 to Oklahoma State. These are schools that are primed and ready to go. Now, granted, I guess the schedule for St. John's is a little bit better because of that MTE that they did play in over at the Barclays Center, where they did face Temple and then beat Syracuse as well to get that Legends Classic trophy. But again, is that enough to say that this team could potentially be prepared and ready to go for Big East play? Granted, obviously there are some non-conference games still sprinkled in, but is this team ready to go for conference play come the 31st, which is the second conference game against Seton Hall?
Well, I think the big criticism is, can you even give a straight yes or no answer on that? I think you probably lean a little bit more toward no, but it always seems like a murky assessment of whether they are or not, which of course is a big criticism. Now, the people may say, "Oh, well, the scheduling narrative is tiring." It's still there. It's still the case, and nobody's asking for a gauntlet. Nobody's asking for you gotta annually go to battle for Atlantis, and that's not that's not gonna be the case, obviously. But there's got to be a middle ground, and certainly if you're St. John's, you look at the schedule metrics and whatnot. I think they're consistently the last couple of years now sub 200 or something like that, or even farther than that. Some of the opponents they play and whatnot. Now, listen, you want to cherry pick out each game, and certain ones they couldn't control, and certain teams underperforming and whatnot, like you're probably going to have with the Florida State game come the 17th. A team that you thought they weren't going to be this bad this year, all that sort of stuff. But that's a conversation for another day. But it's still, at the end of the day, the criticism of the schedule is really that you wind up not being prepared for whether it's conference play or if it was a game on the weekend like it was with Iowa State. They were just not prepared. They got out to a slow start, and now they found the team that is going to punish them for those slow starts. They kept on running into teams that, they got out to that 8-0 start on that. They could afford a slow start because of their talent alone or home court advantage or whatnot. This is a case you are on the road against a good team with with high expectations that knocked off some big teams coming into the game, and they're going to punish you for having that slow of a start.
Dan, I always think about, the last couple of years, how DePaul and St. John's is always a fun battle to watch, whether it be uh, out in Chicago or in Queens. And I think the best part about it too is that you never know which DePaul team you're going to get when those two teams take on each other. And you can make this the same case about St. John's too. Which Red Storm or Blue Demon team are you going to get? And it's obviously, I'm still thinking that as well. Which team are we going to see tomorrow? And with the players that DePaul has, obviously they are a little riddled with injury, as Dan had brought up with Yoranai and Nick Angenda. Keep in mind also, as Dan did say, Dan, it was Caleb Murphy, I believe you had brought up about that, is most likely going to be coming back, or could be coming back tomorrow, rather. Which would be a big boost for them, since he's really a driver.
Yeah. Game time decision, like I said.
Yeah, and something else too, with being a driver and potentially drawing the fouls too. This is something else too. Free throws for DePaul, 78%, second in the Big East too, which is also something that St. John struggles with. And Mike and I, we've spoken about that too with our other co-host Rob DeLuca too. Always his motto is make your free throws, and if you don't, you deserve to lose the game. St. John 68.6% from the charity stripe. Dan, David Jones, this is the first time that DePaul will be seeing him outside of Blue Demon colors. And it is now against St. John's, a conference foe, and he'll be seeing DePaul twice this year. So it should be a ton of fun. What do you see that that Tony Stubblefield and company have to do to lock him down, to ensure that he doesn't feast on his former squad?
You got to frustrate. I mean, you got to get him off to a slow start. That's when he gets a little gets off to a slow start and the shots are not falling. He gets a little sulky. From our memories of him, and it takes a toll on his defense too. Sometimes he gets very disinterested if things are not going. But I've always said this to St. John's fans who ask me. You've probably seen it in a couple of games. He's a powder keg waiting to erupt. He can go off at a moment's notice, where the basket looks like the size of the ocean. That everything goes in from once 2 or 3 shots going. He carried us a lot of games last year, especially on the road against Louisville. He had like 24 points in the second half. Had a triple double against Georgetown. He can be explosive when he's in his zone. He's very, for my thing, he's very inconsistent. And when the shots are not falling, it takes a toll on his defense, and he can loaf sometimes when things are not going good. But I'd like to have him back on our team. How he was a big part of how we got to a decent record last year, most wins in the Big East since 2006. So there's going to be a lot of emotions in the game. We'll see how the ex-DePaul players react to him. I guess some of them are still friendly, but I guess they'll want to stick it to him nonetheless. So we'll see how that draws out.
I was gonna say it's always fun off the court, but then the moment the opening tip and the whistle occur, it's business as usual, and no more friends between one another. So yeah, it's going to be tons of fun. But one final thing that we do want to bring up, Mike Szabo, today. We got a chance to see a tweet from the lead St. John's beat writer from the New York Post, Zach Braziller, say, St. John's says there is no update on Omar Stanley and Dylan Adewusu. Neither played on Sunday at Iowa State and were unavailable. There will be an update given tomorrow. He followed up with that tweet saying, quote, I asked why they didn't play Sunday and was not given a reason, end quote. Mike, this is something that could be a little bit alarming, because we know Dylan Adewusu's disciplinary action or disciplinary issues that have come about in the tenure of Mike Anderson in the last couple of years. And we have seen him potentially miss games, miss starts as well, or not get the starting nod. And now, some height again, Omar Stanley. We don't know what the deal is with him. I believe we did see about a few minutes ago, just before we got on here, that it was something with a foot injury. So we'll be getting more information on that. But now, switching over to the St. John's side in terms of being riddled with injuries, St. John's is not really, that far out of the woods there either, because we know about Andre Curbello's concussion issues wearing the shades. Posh Alexander had a couple of issues there. David Jones had some issues there. So they're coming back, but they are still riddled with some key injuries of note.
Yeah, so I think Omar Stanley, I wind up seeing, another text from Braziller was that it seemed like you said, he had the foot issue. He was limited in practice. Sounds like he's going to be a game time decision tomorrow. They said Dylan Adewusu will be back. Said didn't play on Sunday because of some sort of disciplinary issue that
Yeah.
he practiced in full, but they're not elaborating beyond that. So it's intriguing to monitor, kind of out of the blue. Certainly it's out of the blue to us as fans. We're not the ones in the locker room and with the guys, so or even as media in general. Really interesting to see how that develops. But yeah, there's kind of been a little bit of injuries here and there. I think you're not as worried about the Corbello and concussion stuff as you may have been worried about last year. So far so far so good with that. Paz seems to be okay after that, taking that elbow in the Syracuse game. But yeah, there's a little bumps and bruises here and there. Montez Mathis was sick over the weekend. He came back for the Iowa State game. So there's always things here and there. Looks like they're dealing with a couple of health issues going into tomorrow night's game. But it should be really interesting. The battle that we're going to have, St. John's trying to bounce back. They really have to lock down defensively, especially if I'm sure DePaul's going to probably try and get them into foul trouble and whatnot, as we saw transpire with the Iowa State game most recently.
Yeah.
And, I think it's very telling. Like, I'll leave off with this. I think it's very telling, and it could come off as critical if you're watching that ESPN broadcast, and sort of what we've been hearing for a long time and we've thought a lot of is opposing coaches. You hear nuggets here and there that it's easy to game plan against St. John's. You know what they're going to do. Okay, maybe St. John's winds up still winning because you didn't execute well enough, and they were able to execute better than you. But it seems like there's just an issue with they're predictable. You stop them from being able to drive really well. Take care of the basketball, don't turn it over, and slow down the pace of the game, and they're in trouble. So it's interesting to see if that carries over into conference play, and you see DePaul kind of take that approach tomorrow night. I don't know if that would be the case. We know the last year was sort of like a track meet in Chicago, going back and forth. So both teams like to play up and down. So it's going to be really interesting to see how St. John's tries to bounce back on the home court, or DePaul tries to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, not only that too, Dan, we know what Emoja Gibson can do in terms of stealing the ball too. And then we also know on the other side too, Mike, with what Andre Corbello has brought from the Big Ten here to St. John's as well. So, Dan, I'll leave this off with you before we get into our final segment, which is just predictions for the game, for the Big East opener. What would be your game plan if you were head coach Tony Stubblefield? Again, after hearing what Mike said, they're pretty predictable, but also, again, you had brought up double Joel Soriano. They don't, and they've got some question marks too. What do you do?
Yeah, you just got to be careful with the ball. You got to get out to a good start. That's the biggest issue. DePaul is an awful first half team. They were down, like you said, to Loyola 17. They were never really in the game against Texas A&M, but they were down 18 to Santa Clara. They got that down to like 3. They were down by 16 to Oklahoma State, and they came back and lost by 4. So they're a very good second half team, and I hope the momentum that they won from the last 2 games in back-to-back overtime wins gives them a little juice, a spurt, some energy, some confidence that they can play with energy and get off to a good start. And just be careful with the basketball. We're probably going to get beat on the boards. Just don't get beat on the boards by a lot. Limit the turnovers because St. John's is great defenders, and Corbello and Alexander. And that's where Kellen Murphy can help. I'm not expecting any offense from him. That would be great. He's a big body that's very athletic, and they've been over the summer how he's the best defender on the team individually. So just play good defense, limit the turnovers, and just limit the battle on the boards.
Yeah, obviously, and yeah, for sure. And again, something else too that St. John's needs to to be on alert for is that 3-point defense that we pretty much opened our segment with. Guys, last thing. Dan, your prediction for DePaul and St. John's, the Big East opener. What do you got?
Well, I always do this when we always get predictions, the heart or the head. I think it'll be a good game. I think they'll get off to a good start. Go back and forth. Teams will go on. It'll be a game of runs. I think it'll be a high-scoring game. Where everybody's trying to show each other up, especially Jones, especially guys like Javon Johnson, who was pretty much in Jones' shadow last year.
Yep.
So they'll want to like battle each other. So I see a very high-scoring affair. So, but I think St. John's has more experience, more cohesive unit that's been around for a little longer. It's guys like Alexander and Soriano. So I see them winning 88-85.
Oh, okay. So very, very, very tight ball game. Mike Szabo, do you agree? What do you got?
I do. I would have St. John's winning thanks to Joel Soriano dominating inside. But like Dan said, I think it's going to be high scoring. I'll go 86-82.
Okay, well, I will finish this one off. I'm going to go a little bit lower than the two of you, and I'm going to go 80-74 in favor of St. John's. And exactly what Mike brought up about the board play. I think a lot of the points for DePaul come from distance because, again, we brought up about what both Gibson and Johnson did against Loyola Chicago. St. John's has not had an answer for their 3-point defense, and I do not expect them to have an answer when they take on DePaul on Wednesday night. So, Dan, thank you so much for joining us here tonight on episode number 20 of the Instant Reaction, and we'll see you at Carnesecca. Should be tons of fun.
Yep, can't wait.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Stack, Mike Szabo, I'm Joey Jarzynka. We will see you all later this week for another edition of the Primetime Rundown. So long.